Communications, and also the member for Bradfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to speak on the Appropriations Bill. And in the time available to me, I want to argue three propositions. Firstly, that Australia's economy is facing some significant challenges, both structural and cyclical, which we need to respond to. Secondly, that the Coalition has an economic plan for Australia which will let us rise to the challenge and seize on the opportunities in front of us. And thirdly, that the Labor Party needs to stop denying reality and begin engaging on these issues as a serious political party should. We do face a combination of cyclical and structural challenges, Mr Deputy Speaker. As resources investment falls and key commodity prices drop, that in turn feeds through to tax revenues growing much more slowly, in turn creating severe budgetary pressures. Now, we've inherited a huge budgetary mess from the previous Labor government, which delivered almost $240 billion worth of deficits in the period between 2008-09 to 2013-14. This year, we're paying around $14.2 billion in gross interest costs, which works out to be an average of $40 million every single day. So even if Australia's economic conditions meant that we could continue to expect very strong growth in tax revenues, we'd face a big budgetary challenge. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, because of the end of the investment phase of the resources boom, we cannot expect such continued strong growth in our tax revenues. What we saw between the fiscal 2003 and fiscal year 2008 was that every year revenue significantly exceeded what was budgeted. So-called parameter changes in the jargon of Treasury, which in some years were as high as $30 billion, approaching 2% of GDP. But with the resources investment boom having ended, there's no longer a huge boost to investment as resources companies rush to build new mines and plants. And of course, the prices of key commodities like coal and iron ore are down 50% or more from their peak. All of this means that the budget repair task must be faced when revenues keep undershooting expectations rather than giving us pleasing and unexpected windfalls. Then, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, our economy faces a number of significant structural issues. The first is our ageing population, which, as the recently issued intergenerational report shows, involves a growing proportion of the population being aged 65 or over. Indeed, the number of Australians in this age group is projected to double in the next 40 years. The ratio of people of traditional working age to the very young and to the very elderly is falling. For every person aged 65 and over, today there are currently around 4 people aged between 15 and 64, which incidentally is down from around 7, I think, in the 1970s. And in 40 years' time, that number will nearly halve. Australians are living longer, and we have one of the longest life expectancies in the world. Now, it's worth making the point that for all of us as individuals, that is great news. That is great news. And not only are we living longer, but our so-called quality-adjusted life years are also increasing. That's to say, we can expect a higher proportion of our lifespan to be years of quality living in which we can very much enjoy the opportunities of being alive. But this does have fiscal consequences, Mr Deputy Speaker, with important implications in growing demand for services like health and aged care, which fall very heavily on the Commonwealth budget, and indeed the provision of retirement incomes, the age pension. Another important structural issue we're facing as a nation is the rise of Asia. Now, of course, this presents many opportunities, but it also presents some competitive challenges. And some of these were highlighted in the Innovation and Competitiveness Agenda issued by the government last year, which made the point that economies like China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia and the Philippines have grown dramatically over the past 30 years, and this is projected to continue. It's expected that by 2025, China will be the largest economy in the world. In 1985, so-called emerging Asia represented around 9% of the global economy. By 2025, it will be around 40%. And emerging Asia has also seen its share of global manufacturing output increase from around 6% in 1982 to 29% in 2012. At the same time, its share of services exports has also grown from 6% in 2003 to 11% last year. And the important point is this in terms of the competitive pressures that face the Australian economy. As the economies of Asia invest in education, increase the skill levels of their population and move up the value chain, they are producing ever more advanced goods and services. I saw this myself over a number of years as an executive in the telecommunications sector, where the percentage of telecommunications equipment coming particularly from Chinese vendors started to grow and grow and grow. And the statistics bear this out, Mr Deputy Speaker. In 2000, China produced around 6% of the world's communication equipment. By 2010, this had increased to 26%, and that's coming from brands which have rapidly become very well known globally, like Huawei and ZTE. That brings me to another structural issue our economy is facing, Mr Deputy Speaker, which is the relentless march of technology, which is intensifying competition and fundamentally transforming the global economy. According to a 2011 report from well-known consultancy McKinsey, around a fifth of GDP growth in advanced economies over the previous 5 years had come from the internet and associated technologies. And interestingly, 75% of that was in sectors not traditionally seen as technology industries. Indeed, the disruption of industry after industry by a better internet-based offering is one of the great constants of modern economics. Ask Kodak about digital photography, Fairfax about Seek.com or Drive.com, the free-to-air TV networks about Apple TV or YouTube, Angus and Robertson about Amazon, Blockbuster about Netflix, or Ask Taxis Combined about Uber. This transformation is having a profound industry-by-industry effect. It's also increasingly having a profound national effect. Some nations are doing well out of this massive economic transformation. Some are facing grave threats. Certainly, we can expect a continued growth in the internet economy in Australia. In fact, according to Deloitte Access Economics, it will grow twice as fast as GDP and reach $70 billion by 2016. But clearly, in the face of digital disruption, the first question we need to ask as policymakers is, where does a nation like Australia have a competitive advantage? And we need to recognise that competition is affecting sector after sector, including in the domestic economy in sectors which used to be protected by barriers to entry, such as high costs of transport to get goods into the Australian market. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, if those are some of the challenges and opportunities facing the Australian economy, it is very important that the government has an economic plan, and the coalition certainly does. It is our duty as a government to develop and implement a plan to respond, as the global economy is changing so quickly. We have a number of strands to that economic plan. Firstly, we need to get debt and deficit under control. We cannot continue to finance spending through increased debt. Clearly, as your debt grows, you become more vulnerable as a nation, and with Australia in particular having relatively high levels of private indebtedness, it's particularly important to have a strong public sector balance sheet. To protect yourself as a nation, to avoid vulnerability, what you want to see is a government contributing to national savings and reducing debt through budget surpluses, not adding to debt through budget deficits. We also need to address the underlying issue of rising Commonwealth spending, which in real terms since 2007-8 has grown by an annual average of more than 4%, compared to 3% in the 1980s and 90s. And here's a little legacy of Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan, who still is the member for Lilly, that in just 6 years to 2013-14, Mr Deputy Speaker, government spending as a percentage of GDP has risen by around 2.5 percentage points. That's an extraordinary leap in a short period of time. So if our first priority is getting debt and deficit under control, the next priority is to really get our university system firing, Mr Deputy Speaker, because we face as a nation the imperative of capturing technology-driven economic growth for the reasons I spoke about earlier, and it's therefore vital that our university system is able to perform to its full potential. In the 21st century, our universities must be engine rooms of innovation and discovery, and it is this reality which underpins the government's plan to give universities the freedom to set their own fees, student numbers and strategic direction. And it's fascinating to see a growing number of Labor luminaries, no longer constrained by caucus discipline, coming out in support of the sorts of changes that we are advocating to the university system. Another priority for the coalition government in responding to economic challenges is to capture as a nation the trade opportunities in Asia in both services and products, with a set of policies that look to the future to capture the opportunities available to us thanks to our geography, our endowments of natural and economic resources, and the talent and creativity of our people. In just 1 year, Trade Minister Andrew Robb has secured new free trade agreements with Korea, Japan and China, which not only offer significant opportunities for our agricultural and resources exporters, but also reduce barriers that have until now held back Australian services exports in these markets. Another priority is supporting Australian business in this new intensely competitive world, with Industry Minister McFarlane having recently updated industry policy to recognise the new imperatives of competition. He has reprioritised funding, putting money towards building better linkages between industry on the one hand and researchers in universities and institutes on the other, with the aim of leveraging Australia's considerable research strengths into new business opportunities. Another part of the Coalition's economic plan to respond to the challenges and opportunities we face is to enhance our national infrastructure to increase our productivity. From Infrastructure Minister Truss and Communications Minister Turnbull, we're seeing billions of dollars going into enabling infrastructure to make our economy more competitive and productive. A second Sydney airport, expressways to move people and freight more quickly around our major cities, and of course the national broadband network to make high-speed connections available to all Australians. Let me turn to the third proposition I wish to put to the House this afternoon, Mr Deputy Speaker, which is that at a time of challenge for the Australian economy, it's incumbent upon the Labor Party to stop denying reality and begin to engage seriously on these issues. Just as happened 30 years ago when Australia faced a set of serious challenges as our heavily protected and regulated economic model left us increasingly uncompetitive. The Labor Party of today seems miles away from the Labor Party of that day, which engaged seriously with those issues. But there is a challenge to our political system in 2015 to come together to address these strategic issues that we face as a nation. And I want to quote from what respected economist Warwick McKibben had to say in the Financial Review today. Quotes, "Labor appears to cling to the fallacy that adroit fiscal policy explains Australia's success. The continued belief in Labor's fiscal miracle appears to underlie the reluctance of current Labor leaders to acknowledge the extent of the multiple problems Australia faces. Australia can't continue to attempt to keep the economic structures of the previous century when resources, human and physical, need to be channelled into new industries." Close quotes. So some comments by a very respected economist there, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the challenges our nation faces and the importance of the Labor Party engaging seriously with policy responses. But instead, so far, we've simply seen, I'm disappointed to say, some fairly silly political game playing. According to the opposition leader, we don't have a serious budget problem, we simply have a budget task. Those were his words in the budget and reply last year. We have the Shadow Treasurer dismissing Australia's federal debt challenges as mere rhetoric, and he's quoted as saying, "Debt is expected to peak at 17% of GDP. Compare that to Canada. A well-run, resource-based economy, conservatively administered with debt more than double that, or Germany at 52%. We're not talking about Greece or Portugal or Ireland here." So in those quotes, the Shadow Treasurer seeks to dismiss the issue of Commonwealth government debt, He mentions Ireland, and it's instructive to look at actually what happened in Ireland, which in 2007 had a debt-to-GDP ratio of only 11.1%. But the Irish economy then fell into deep recession. Banks needed to be recapitalised with public money. The net debt-to-GDP ratio exploded, and 6 years later in Ireland, net debt as a percentage of GDP is well over 90%. And here's the social consequence of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, that unemployment today in Ireland at 10.5% is more than double the rate it stood at prior to the GFC. So despite these claims from the Labor Party that we don't need to worry about the debt-to-GDP ratio, the fact is, if we look at Ireland and other examples around the world, the sort of ongoing budgetary mismanagement the Labor Party continues to advocate has serious social consequences, including savagely high unemployment rates. And that is an outcome that the Coalition is working very hard to make sure we do not face in Australia. In conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, Australia faces both cyclical and structural challenges. but our fast-changing economic circumstances also offer rich opportunities. The Coalition has an economic plan for Australia which will let us rise to the challenge and seize on the opportunities, and I would like to see the Labor Party join in a serious engagement with these issues in the national interest.